guys? I'm Alex.
I'm Jason. We're the Table Monkeys, and today we are going to discuss the King's Hook.
Yeah, not the King's Move. We got our Crazy George shirts on. Obviously, he's the most famous King's Mover on the planet.
Yeah, if you don't know who he is, well, fuck, you should. Yeah. And go check him out because that's where all this craziness kind of started.
Yeah,
right?
And we have a King's Move 101 video up on our channel, card up in the window. Check that out if you don't know how to King's Move.
Yeah.
But today's video is going to be about the King's Hook.
Yeah, we got a comment. Somebody was asking if we could analyze Sam Burnett's King's Hook because he's kind of made this sort of popular in the arm wrestling world via Ryan Blue Bowen and his channel Pound for Pound Arm Wrestling. So we're going to take a look at it and explain how we feel it's similar to the King's Move, how it differs, and where it might land on the hill of arm wrestling techniques, which is another video if you don't know about. Check the card up in the window where we explain all the different techniques in arm wrestling and where they lie on this theoretical hill of techniques.
So let's start with the King's Move and just break that down for you real quick. So it is a hand-based move, not a bone lock move. Obviously it helps you have a bone lock, but you don't need to have one.
Exactly.
So the fundamentals that you're going to hang on to in your hand above all else is rise and pronation. You're going to give up everything else to secure those two.
Yeah.
And then
after that, even arm angle, shoulder position, everything else you're going to give up. The only thing you're really going to maintain is drag. So you want to kind of be able to have your elbow still to the back of the pad and have the match as close to your side of the table as possible. But even if your arm is fully extended and you've got your elbow to the back of the pad, you're still maintaining a lot of position on the table, right?
Yeah.
So after that, it's kind of comes down to strategy. There's a lot of King's movers are very defensive pullers. They're waiting for their opponent to kind of wear themselves out by being overzealous, trying to break through this wall that they're finding. Because a King's move usually feels kind of weak. Like before you get to that stop, it doesn't feel like there's much there, and then all of a sudden there's this like hard stop, and you feel this tension in the back of your wrist through the strap and all this nastiness, and people get frustrated and they try to just blast through it. That's kind of the last thing you want to do with a King's Move, or as we're going to explain, a King's Hook.
Yes, the King's Hook is very similar in that regard, but the difference is in the fundamentals in the hand that you're going to hold on to.
Yeah, that's really where the move differs. Other than that, we see it to be very, very similar to a King's Move. So, as Alex said, in the King's Move, it's rise and pronation. The hook, King's Hook, is very similar. You're still going to hang on to pronation. That's still a fundamental that you're going to hang on to amongst everything else.
Yeah.
But instead of rise, you're going to focus on cup.
Yes. You're going to give up your rise and hold on to pronation and cup. Pronation is your defense against that sideways surge.
It's how you create that tension in the strap, and we're going to show a little bit of Sam Burnett at some point, I'm not sure when, explaining how he gets that tension and how we think that maybe that's part of what he's found in this move, which makes it unique. So first thing we're going to need to do is put on the strap.
Yes. All right, guys, we're strapped up, and this is where all the magic happens when it comes to King's moving or King's hooking. And the magic really is in this part of the strap when it comes to your pronation.
Yeah.
You're pronating through this part of the strap, not so much your hand, and that's what creates that weird tension on the back of his wrist, which wants to force it back.
Yeah, and prevent me from adding flexion or getting my wrist flexion established. So that's where, if you are a King's mover, or if you go against a King's mover, that's usually what's going to blow up right away, is people's forearm and their flexion from trying to cut through this weird tension that you're doing with the strap.
Yep, and then you're usually outside of your shoulder because the King's mover is dragging you outside, so it's just a very weird feeling.
And this tension does come from dropping and rolling the way that you do with the King's move. And again, if you don't have a bone lock, you're going to have to maintain a lot of up pressure and back pressure with your bicep. But if you do have a bone lock, obviously there are some spots there where you can lay on that bone lock. But as we learned with the most recent match between this fucking superhuman Devin and Michael Todd, was that it was really the hand. Once Devin beat Michael's hand, it didn't matter that Mike had a bone lock. Devin was already past that by beating his hand, right?
Because it's three fundamentals he's holding on to, really. Rise, pronation, and drag. And once you beat two of them, he's got one left. It's not enough.
It's not enough.
290-pound Devin.
Yeah, exactly. And the bone lock becomes insignificant there, because once you max out that bone lock and apply pressure on it after getting through the hand, it's the same as if my arm was fully straight. He's going to feel that same pressure. It's painful, and he has to stand up, or he feels his arm going to break.
So the King's Move and King's Hook are mostly defensive moves, like we said. The King's Move can happen from a top roll failing and getting my arm blown out, so I just decide to transition to a King's Move.
Yeah.
And King's Hook is kind of the opposite, where you can start in a hook and if you get your arm taken, you can transition into a king's hook. And that's what we see Sam Burnett doing quite a lot.
The point is they both start in the hand. So let's show Sam Burnett here, and you can see that first thing he does is establish his hand position by getting his cup and his pronation set, and then he starts to drop down, and you can see as he drops down the way he kind of rolls the outside of his wrist into the strap. So let's watch Alex kind of demonstrate that here. So let's get to a ready go position, and then we both get into a hook, right? And as he rolls out, now when I push to the side, like I have to get through his arm, which is one thing, but I feel all this weird tension in my hand, and he's got my pronation kind of, taken as well by having his cup established. So I can rise and maybe I can climb on him, but if I try to just go through it, like even if I feel like I can work on his arm, as I push, like let your arm go a bit, it's still this, the further I get towards the pad, the more this tension tightens in my wrist. So at whatever point he can create enough pressure in his bicep or arm to stop me, it's also going to be breaking my hand back.
Yeah, and
the same way that a king's move does almost.
And it's not so easy to rise out of my hand because I've got my cup established, which is effectively controlling his back pressure.
Yeah.
So it is tricky.
Yeah.
It is a weird stop, and it does require a lot of table IQ to get through it.
Yeah. And just trying to pound through it is definitely not the way to do it. But the most important part is the same way Sam Burnett did, is what Alex just showed there, is he's got to get his hand position first before he rolls out. Let's go flat and roll out first, and then try to start getting some cup and stuff. If I can get too much of this or take too much of his pronation, he's not going to be able to get there. He's got to get this first, which if we go to a traditional king's move, let me do a traditional one for a second. If I don't hit high and up and get that rise position established, which if you watch again, maybe let's show the hit from Devin and Michael right here. You can see when Michael hits into it, as he hits into it, he loses some rise. And now when Devin actually hits into him, he loses all his rise. And at that point, he knew he was fucked. It was at that point he knew he was fucked.
Yeah, so just like that, it is all about the hand. You got to beat the hand to beat the king's hook. So how do we beat the king's hook?
Yeah, what part of the king's hook do we think is the best part to go after? If for the king's move, it was the rise seemed to be the most important part for Devin in both times that he's defeated it. The first time was climbing over it, defeating the rise, and then pressing it down. And this most recent time was just dominating it and being fucking a freak of nature.
Yep.
With the king's hook, we feel it's the cup, right?
Yes.
So if Alex goes back into that king's hook, so we get into the the hook, and then he rolls out, and now I can feel this tension in my wrist. Going this way doesn't work. What Devin and a lot of people have realized about the king's move is that if I lay off the pressure and come into him here, if he's not strong enough to pin me there, where I can kind of wear on him, at this point, either I'm resting or he might be resting too, but he knows I'm resting. It's not a good position for him. And from here, I've got two options. I could hit again to the side and try to take some thumb and pronation, or from here, I could try to rise up into his fingers.
Yes. Actually, the coming back over here, it releases a lot of tension that I've created because I'm relying on you pushing to the side to create the tension.
Which is the same thing that happens if I king's move. I'll king's move, and you do that to me. Like, as he comes over here, all this tension that I'm trying to create with my wrist, it's like I can't create it down here, and I can't create too much down pressure here either. If he's got a good tight hook, I'm not going to get through here. And what Devin is really good at doing, and what he did to me when he did this, was every time he came back, he got a bit more cup, and then he hit with taking a little bit more of my pronation and making it harder, because every time I try to get that lock, I was getting it, less and less or closer and closer to the pad.
Yeah.
So it works the same way in the king's hook. If you go back into it, if instead of coming this way, if I come back to the side of my pad here, he's lost that pressure there, and if I do that plus add a rise to it, all of a sudden he's really feels rolled out, and now his thumb is much more exposed. I can even come back in, get over for a press. Once I've gotten into his fingers and taken that pressure away from him, it kind of makes him have to make an adjustment, which is not what he wants to do. In a king's move, you want to sit there, let your opponent pound through it, and as soon as they get weak, go haha, bang.
Yeah, because there really isn't a lot of adjustments to make because I've given up everything to get into that position. I'm really relying on that being the answer.
Exactly.
And explain that rise a little bit, because it's not traditional rising where you're rising through the top knuckle.
Yeah.
It's actually rising through the wrist.
Yeah, so one thing, I think Devin made a point of this. If you've watched enough of his seminars, you might have heard him say this before, where the low hand top roll kind of got named incorrectly, and it should be called a high bottom, because it's still rising. I'm still rolling over my opponent's hand, but I'm doing it through the bottom or through my wrist. I'm not trying to rise through the top of my knuckle this way. I'm trying to rise through the bottom of my hand, which we've talked about in setup videos and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing here. Once I come over here and he's trying to cut me in here, instead of trying to roll his hand this way, I'm going to push my elbow forward and rise up into his fingers by trying to push my knuckle. So why don't you do it to me? I'll King's hook you.
Yeah.
So like this.
Yep. And then so it's like I'm chopping at his wrist and then pushing up through his bottom finger with my wrist.
Yeah.
And getting rise.
Yeah. And now I have to chase that. I can't, like, down here, I've got none of my pressures are working. I'm losing the thing that I want. So now I have to come back and chase something. So I'm adjusting, and he has an opportunity to jump on my adjustment.
Yeah. While he's coming up, I can hit, get him back out of position, and take his hand and hopefully win from there.
But again, I think really the best way to beat the King's move or the King's hook is don't go through it, give up position, get behind it, and once you do get behind it, you're either, if their King's moving, you're going to attack their rise or their pronation, and if their King's hooking, you're going to attack their fingers or their pronation.
Yep. It's all about the hand. King's hook,
King's move, press, top roll,
Yep.
doesn't really matter. Arm wrestling is a hand-based sport, and the more you learn to use your hand, the more you learn how your hand involves with the rest of the move, the better you're going to get at all the different parts of the hill of arm wrestling.
Yeah, and I guess we just got a new move added to the list.
Yeah, so where do we think this move is going to land on the hill?
That's a good question. So it's not a top roll, right? Because top roll is rise based.
Yeah.
And this move, like we said, is hook
It's
based.
definitely a hook.
Or cut based.
Yeah.
So because it's cut based,
it's got no shoulder commitment.
Right.
Which, the way the hill works, the further down the hook side of the hill you go, the less hand you're committing to in order to commit your shoulders is the basic way that we've defined it. But with this move, you're trying to keep your hand while giving up on everything else.
Yes.
So,
but you're still dragging. You're
Yeah.
still trying to bring the match closer to you.
yeah.
So that's why I kind of think it's like a hook and drag, but with an open arm.
Yeah.
Still trying to focus on, still trying to hold on pronation.
It's, you know what, in reality, it's kind of like half a one,
Yeah.
you know, or half a dozen of one, six of the other.
It's like
kind
in
of thing.
between the hill.
Because you could define it as a top roll just with no rise.
Yeah.
You know, it's very similar to an open top roll, where an open top roll we think you're still trying to contain your opponent, but you're still focusing mainly on rise and pronation. And a little bit of containment, and once you lose containment, then you're in a King's move. So maybe this is an open top roll, but instead of rise, you're committing to containment and cup.
Yeah, just
and
a
no
slight
rise.
variation, I guess, on the open arm top roll.
So we're gonna put up the hill right now, and we're gonna say it's one of these two positions. It depends on, you know, tomato.
Yes. But that was the video. We hope you liked that analysis. Please leave us some feedback in the comments. Drop a like.
Yeah, subscribe, smash that bell button, do all those things.
And monkeys out.
Peace.